the act of going out and eating and sitting down and breaking bread together is something that you can't fully replace and outsource to online. So we're in this funny kind of business that we can't completely flip to online. There will always be an element of keeping bricks and mortar.
Hi there, you're very welcome back to All in Business, your weekly business show here on Joe, backed by AIB. Well, it's another week in lockdown and another show coming to you from the bedroom. This week, we're looking at the Irish food industry, how it has been impacted by the pandemic and how it's reacted. Here to discuss, we're joined by the co-founder of ITSA Cafe and many other food enterprises, Domini Kemp, and Paul Cadden, the founder of Saba, a chain of Thai and Vietnamese restaurants and takeaways. Our trailblazer is Aidan Connolly, the CEO of agtech firm Cainthus. He's here to tell us how technology is affecting the future of farming and food production. Now, before all that, don't forget to hit subscribe to get the full show each week on podcast and on YouTube. And of course, you'll find us on social media. We're on LinkedIn and Twitter with the hashtag AllInBusiness.
Joe presents All In, together with AIB, backing Irish business.
Domini and Paul, you're so welcome to the show. You're both in food services, so many might say you're in the enviable position that your services are still required and deemed essential. However, that doesn't mean that you haven't been affected by COVID. How are things doing? How are you holding up in both your businesses?
Yeah, well, we made the decision to close everything, and we discussed whether we would make an attempt to try and reopen and sort of pivot to do some deliveries or minimize takeout. But I think in the end, there was a little bit of, I suppose, concern amongst staff about, how realistic it would be in order to keep the sort of social distancing and so on. And I guess because it's not really our core business, we made the decision we could be throwing good money after bad, trying to do something that we're not really equipped to do. And if further limitations come down the line, will we have just spent time and money and not really been successful? So I think we took the decision to kind of stand down and just wait it out. And I suppose we look and applaud all the companies like Paul and so on who actually have done it and have managed to do it really well and really safely. But I suppose it's not the decision we made.
Dominic, on that, when all we're hearing is, think creatively, think outside the box, adapt or die, be innovative. And obviously, as a very successful businesswoman yourself, you're obviously used to doing all those things. It must have been, I'd imagine that wasn't a clear-cut decision for you. It must have been a challenge and something you had to mull over for a while to come up with that decision.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, because there is this absolute frustration, and I suppose entrepreneurs in general, the problems come at them, and it's really about trying to find ways to overcome those difficulties and continually challenge yourself and just to get on with it. So it was actually quite hard to make the decision to not do anything. So in some ways I regret it, but I think in some ways, though, I suppose we all need a lot of energy for when we reopen. And it just felt like it was going to be too messy for our business. And again, I think most businesses now, because we've all sort of been put into hibernation, the main thing is trying to conserve cash, for when we reopen, because we don't know the sort of limitations that are going to be on us in terms of, we have restaurants and we're told to pull 50% of our seating outside. How can we operate at 50% capacity? So there are all these concerns and worries that I have going forward. And I guess for us, it's about trying to keep cash and preserve the business. That's our main focus when we are allowed reopen.
And Paul, you've had kind of the opposite experience in a way. I know you closed down all 6 of your branches, but you're in your Baggot Street branch today where a staggered reopening of sorts is happening. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I empathise with Domini. We, on the night the lockdown was announced, we had 2 places open at the time, Baggot Street and Rathmines. We called a meeting and everybody was the exact same. Let's close, safety first. And so we closed for the 2 weeks. And then coming towards the second 2 weeks, we're in a fortunate position where we have Thai team here in Baggot Street, 3 chefs in the kitchen who two of them live together, and the other person they all travel by bike, walk, and the management team as well. There's three of them, and they were the exact same guys who closed on the night of the lockdown, and the exact same thing happened in Rathmines. Father, son, and another colleague who lived with them. They're working in the kitchen, and my brother, another manager from Clarendon Street, are out front. So they're tight teams, and as we opened Dean's Grange as well, it's guys living together and know each other, and they're all happy to open. And that was the fortunate position. We're on much more limited menu. Everybody's rolled up the sleeves. We're doing the cleaning. Everybody, there's very limited number of staff in the place. It's delivery only. Limited collections when you come to the door for people who are local, regular customers, and that. And it's been really challenging. And I think the exact same as Domini says, you're an entrepreneur and you want to pivot, but there's only so much you can pivot. It's not like a recession where, come on, let's think of a new idea, and you get it up and running, you hope for the best. People can die, people are dying, and that's the most frightening part of this. One part of your brain is going, let's think of a new idea, how can we attack this differently? And then you sit back and you get you're overwhelmed with nearly sometimes stories. I have friends who work in the front line in hospitals in Dublin, and that's a totally different scenario. We're so lucky not to be in that scenario. So you've got all these different crazy emotions going on at time, and you're trying to find a pathway through.
And I'm curious, Paul, in terms of you've had different paths, both of you, to where you are now. In that, Domini made the decision to not to do anything, I suppose, and to sit tight and ride out the storm. Whereas Paul, and so I suppose in one way, Domini, when that decision's made, it's quite definitive. Whereas Paul, you taking the other road, that comes with many, many more decisions on top of it. Everything down to what kind of menu are we going to offer? How's this going to work? I know that you'd be very conscious of your own staff and the Saba family, as well as customers and health and safety and so on. But how do you know where the line is, and how do you know how far to take it? How do you know 2 branches instead of 6, 2 dishes instead of 10? I'm just curious as to how you made these decisions as they came up, and how you know what the right decision is.
I suppose you never know the right decision. If I knew that, I'd probably be out of this game a long time ago.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely be doing something else.
I joke, I grew up in the business. Both my parents were hoteliers, and we had a restaurant in Westport, and I've 2 younger brothers. One, Alan, who runs he's ops for the takeaways, and my other brother has bar 1 in Castlebar. And I think we almost been dropped as children, because to stay in this business can be crazy. Am I right, Domini?
Absolutely.
But to answer the question, where is it? Listen, you're guided by your team. Every single decision we've made is sit down with the guys. We opened Holy Thursday again, and we said we'll take it every 2 days to make a decision. And it's a team decision to close it. And if they decide again, listen, it's time to close it again, we'll do that. And listen, we're guided as well by, I think, the fantastic leadership of the government. They've been clear on takeaways can stay open if the distancing can be done. We've done our kitchen to split into 3 different zones. And same. We've 1 manager in the kitchen for bagging, 1 at the front for taking calls, and then a runner. So we're putting everything in place. If we have masks available, if staff want to wear masks, we put screens up throughout the 3 units. You see them in supermarkets as well. Gloves, sanitizers, places deep cleaned every day. We literally every single thing we can do, we've done.
I think that's such an interesting point, though, as well, because it's like it's during times of crisis, as the boss of the company, you have to show leadership and you have to drive through these problems. But as Paul said, these were things that it was sort of leadership, but in a very democratic way, because if you don't have the support of your teams and you aren't making these decisions collectively, you can't drag people into this scenario to come and work. It just doesn't work. So it's the nicest form of leadership, that you could ask for. And again, as we were talking about, very different from the last recession in terms of, it was constantly thinking of innovation and what felt like, how can you, who can hold their breath for the longest? That's what the financial crisis felt like. Here, we're all wondering, is there going to be this kind of bounce back? Is it going to be then restricted because of legislation that will affect the levels of business that we can do? What's it going to be like? And, I'm trying to read up on terms of what happened during the SARS crisis in 2003. And of course, there was a huge explosion in online business. A lot of businesses did decide to pack up their kind of bricks and mortar stores. There's an element of food and restaurants that we can't constantly outsource. Of course, delivery is huge. Online deliveries, Deliveroo, Just Eat, all these companies. But at the same time, the act of going out and eating and sitting down and breaking bread together is something that you can't fully replace and outsource to online. So we're in this funny kind of business that we can't completely flip to online. There will always be an element of keeping bricks and mortar, but I guess it's trying to figure out how much that is going to change, especially with a society like ours that are unbelievably sociable. We love sitting down together. That's something we really do well as a country. Yeah. So what's that going to look like in the next few years?
I suppose you can't replace the experiential side of eating out, as you rightly say, and the social side and everything else. We're probably heading into a funny period now where, as this continues, there are absolutely more business closures coming, unfortunately. But the huge contrast of that will presumably be, especially for anything in food, socializing, hospitality, that there's presumably also a huge boom coming on the other side as we all scramble to feel alive again. A huge boom coming for those who are still around and still open. For yourselves, but also not just for yourselves. I'm sure you have many, colleagues and friends in the business community. What is the feeling about that? Is there a huge sense of anticipation, or is there also a lot of fear about what's coming afterwards?
Yeah, I've definitely spoken to a few people who are very apprehensive, whose restaurants and businesses would be quite heavily influenced by tourist trade. Now, certainly for us, we operate about 12 different locations. Some of them are actually in museum locations. So again, we'll be hit there because of visitor numbers and the decline in tourists. That season really runs from March to September, October. So that hit and that boost that you need, that will be gone. And we just have to adjust our projections, look at our budgets, and be realistic about what the knock-on impact is going to be. But I think interestingly, we do a lot of high-end events and corporate catering and wedding through Feast Catering and Events. And interestingly, although we lost a couple of weddings for May, we actually have gained a few weddings in September because people who can't travel to Italy are now going to get married here in Ireland. So, there's been a couple of silver linings, not loads, but some. And I guess it's just trying to see what that might look like. And again, a little bit like the 2008, there was such a big push by Fáilte Ireland and everything about staycation, actually really this amazing sort of embracing of everything Irish. And it was a great time in terms of Irish food, and as new businesses coming in and entering, the food and restaurant and hospitality, because the entry points were so low, it was really easy economically to enter. And I think, Paul, you'd agree, there's probably been a huge oversupply in the last year or two. There's been restaurant opening after opening. We've all probably been saying to ourselves, how much can we tolerate in terms of the supply and demand? We're not London. We don't have this density of population, and just the supply is too much. We have that now. We have this crisis, and the two, absolutely, as you say, Yvonne, will lead to a number of closures.
Listen, we before going into this crisis, I think we were at one of the highest points in regard to fantastic restaurants throughout the country. And was even better was they were showcasing Irish produce from, we really have become a food nation. And even if you see how suppliers now are pivoting online and people are buying their produce from, I see St. Tulla's Cheese, who never had an online presence, and so many different producers pulling a lot of small producers together and selling them. It's fantastic to keep those guys going. And throughout the country, amazing restaurants who are all really nervous about how they're going to open up and whether it's going to be slow, etc. I do think Vulture Ireland and Tourism Ireland would put huge investment into staycation. And I think that's where the key is. Like, at the end of the day, we have the Facebooks and the Googles and all these big companies in Ireland. There's a lot of inward investment. It will be a different economy after this. If you look at reading up on articles of what's happening and talking to guys here who have seen what happened in Wuhan, like the restaurants are back open and cinemas, but there's nobody going to them. So there will have to be a confidence building exercise for customers to say, yes, we are safe. This is how we're going to do it when that time comes.
And Paul, you mentioned earlier that you thought the government were doing a great job in terms of leadership. I'm wondering what you both feel they could be doing more of, or what you feel they should do when this is all over to kickstart things again, so that we don't enter, a depression even bigger than 2008, I suppose.
Well, I think that definitely, I mean, the VAT, we've all been pretty vocal in our industry about the VAT remaining at 13.5%, and I think dropping that down or potentially looking at scrapping that for a bit, that will definitely ease. Rents have become a problem again for a lot of us in terms of just rent creep. Everyone's done a great job, and one of the key things is to make sure that there's cohesion about what they're saying, and excuse me, that it's consistent in terms of public messaging. And exactly as Paul says, that confidence building piece will be critical to getting people, because we've all got so used to staying at home now. We're going to have to be, practically beaten out of our houses to get back out there, and that will be about positive messaging and reducing people's fear of going out again.
And then business-wise, I guess, is marketing more important than ever then to remind people you're still there, and you still exist and you're still around afterwards.
Yeah, I think there's a couple elements to that where you've also got to convince people. Well, the people sitting at home who are maybe getting the $350 a week, they have to see an end to this, so they will allow themselves to spend. I think a lot of people are minding whatever they have, and they'll be hesitant to spend anything. And we're also seeing that in the delivery. It's not just because the takeaways are open, we're not flat out at all. You can see where people are holding back. I think there was a holiday, the first 2 weeks of the lockdown, it was like Christmas every day, and off licenses and takeaways were flying and everything else. And then when the next month, literally a month, was announced, everybody went, well, hold on a second, this could last. There was a realization there to maybe pull in your horns a little bit. So nobody really knows how long this is going to go on for. And I think we've, as a nation, we've been done fantastically. Everybody is so supportive of each other.
Amazing.
We're here in a Zoom call, like, who'd have thought that like a couple of months ago. So I just think like everybody's adapting really well, and people have confidence that they'll have money in their pocket, and then we can do the confidence piece in the restaurant. And I think we're in the containment phase now for the government, and then there'll be a reboot phase, and it's like what they come up with, like 0% VAT on food. We've been saying that for a long time. If across Europe and America, you're allowed to claim back expenses if anyone in business dines out. We still don't have that in Ireland. There's loads of different pieces there that can even in regard to, in France, the government have taken 60% of the rent, the landlord has taken 20%, and the restaurateurs are paying 20% to get them back open. So you're talking about rent creep there now. Like that's a big investment, But like these are probably the things that have to go. Like the numbers are staggering. Like if 50% of restaurants close, that's a lot of staff. That's a lot of beef farmers, dairy farmers, small producers supplying into those restaurants. From electricians fixing stuff. Like the spread of the multiplier effect of a restaurant throughout a local economy is huge. So, especially in rural Ireland, a big restaurant can, and hotels as well. The hotel stock throughout the country is absolutely fantastic. If we can keep people in Ireland and spend in Ireland, I think that will definitely help. But the incentives have to be there.
And you both come from entrepreneurial families and backgrounds, so I'm guessing you picked up a thing or two from watching your own families and your network weather the storm before, dealing with previous crises. You must have learned a lot from that.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting. I suppose because my sister and I were in business together, and we were talking about the fact that we just last year celebrated our 20th year in business. And looking at all the different sort of bubbles and peaks and troughs and all the things that happen. And I mean, I do think it's sort of, it's interesting, two of the worst crises, 2008 and now this, it's sort of like going, come on, can we just spread it out a little bit? We just,
can we catch a
give
break?
it a little bit of break. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I definitely, I think, when you've gone through different crises, I think and with age as well comes an element of confidence of being able to know how low you can go, and the I hate the expression digging deep, but there are times where you do have to dig deep into your own psyche in terms of psychologically remaining strong, remaining leadership. You have to be a leader during these times of crisis. People need to see confidence. Your teams need to see you confident, and it isn't a sort of Pollyanna upbeat, it's all fabulous. It's not. This whole thing sucks, but at the same time we do have to be mindful. We have electricity, we have water, there are no bombs raining down on us. We're in a really much better position than so many people, and again, it's to try and remember that and not get sucked into the quagmire of misery. And I suppose I've been having conversations with people who are heading that way, and I just kind of say, listen, we just not doing it. I'm not doing it back, because it's just it's not helpful right now, and we just don't know to a certain extent. So it's each day that comes, being vigilant, being open to ideas, but minding your cash and keeping your energy and keeping your head good for when we do open, because my goodness, we will need the resources for when the doors open again.
And Paul, your family up in the hotel in Mayo and the restaurant as well, God, surely back in the 80s, etc., they've seen a recession or two.
Yeah, they've seen we've a good few laughs over the last few days, and you're totally right. State of mind, I think, at the moment is everything, because it's so easy to get pulled down. And listen, I think before the lockdown happened, the stress in the business, you could feel everyone was scared, and now we're back open and we're having a laugh. There's a great atmosphere, and everybody's happy to be back, which is great. But yeah, my parents, they had a seafood restaurant in Westport, and they had oil crisis and massive interest rates and loads of. They didn't have a pandemic. They didn't have. We've got that one on them.
Not a competition, Paul.
No,
not a competition. But if it was, I think we'd win.
I think, but and congratulations, 20 years in business. That's phenomenal. Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a fantastic achievement. Yeah. So yeah, I think listen, we sat around the table as kids talking about the business. And challenges, but there were the day-to-day stuff. This really, you do go look at other people like Domini in the industry and listen to them, and they've got it's as you said, the experience and the wisdom that you can't buy that stuff. It's just people have it, and when they say something, such gravitas to it, and hence I'm talking to a lot of friends in the industry, listening to what they have to say. And you're right, it's about mindset, and we'll get through this, and taking care of their teams and looking forward as much as possible, because you don't have a crystal ball.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to leave it, you guys. Thank you so much for being with us. And I have to say, all this talk about food and socializing with food, I would give anything to be in an ITSA cafe or a Saba right now, I can tell you.
Great stuff.
But we'll all see you on the far side, and listen, stay safe, stay in business. We need places to go and eat afterwards.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Yvonne.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Yvonne. Bye-bye. Thank you, Domini.
Bye, Paul. Mind yourself.
Bye-bye.
My next guest has quite the laundry list of achievements to his name. President of Agritech Capital Investing Firm, CEO of Cainthus, and member of the Forbes Technology Council. Aidan Connolly is here to tell us why the future of farming and food production is about to change forever. Aidan, thank you so much for joining us this morning from your house in Dublin. Thanks for being with us. I wanted to start this off by asking you, what do you think is the most exciting thing going on in AgTech right now?
Well, AgTech is something that people have been talking about for obviously quite a few years. And the presumption is that that's going to change the way we farm and that's the way we produce food. But in actual fact, the adoption of technology has been quite slow. I suppose farming is conservative and that's the nature of the business. But this process, unfortunately, which is obviously affecting a lot of lives, is actually accelerating the adoption of ag technology on farm to a degree that we haven't seen before. In particular, some maybe of the things that maybe seem a little bit more boring, like trading platforms, data collection, those are all being suddenly accepted by farmers in a way that perhaps they didn't before. But I think everything to do with the digitization of agriculture is expanding and accelerating at the moment.
And it's even the small things, I suppose, like, if it's calving season and suddenly, you've 9-10 calves there are no marts open. So what do you do if you can't go digital? So, are we talking change at the broad strokes level, but also probably, at the really fundamental level?
All of those. So everything to do with being able to avoid having people come onto the farm, avoiding the farmer having to go to, as you said, the mart. Suddenly we have to be able to take out a camera phone, take a photograph of your animal, send it to somebody else. And fundamentally, that's predicated upon trust. So things like blockchain, things like obviously the previous experience or history of the seller and the buyer, all those things suddenly become parts of this digital agriculture that we've always talked about happening, but really hasn't. If you think, Yvonne, about agriculture, I suppose it's sometimes hard to believe, but we've only been farming for about 8,000 or 9,000 years. Now, to put that in context, we've been on the earth for over 1 million. So why it was we decided 9,000 years ago to suddenly start farming is one of those questions that lots of people have asked, and it's assumed it coincides with the end of the last ice age. But the reality is pretty much since we domesticated the cow, domesticated the sheep, the chicken, wheat, barley, something like 9 crops and 6 livestock species, pretty much since then, not a whole lot has changed. So the idea that suddenly we're going to be in a position to watch precisely crops, animals, to see exactly what they're doing, how they're growing, the stress they're under, their health, that's just extraordinary. And I think it's critical not just for farmers, but obviously for consumers as well. Consumers want to know more about where their food is coming from.
Exactly. And I think probably COVID's doing a lot for that at the moment as well. Last week we had Michael Kelly from Grow It Yourself on the show, and he was saying that the demand for Grow It Yourself kits has gone off the charts because, first of all, people have nothing else to do, stuck at home on lockdown. And secondly, I suppose things like we're having good weather and people are trying to keep kids at home occupied. Do you think farming might enjoy, look, obviously there's no Grow It Yourself kit for learning how to farm in a lockdown, but people might have a renewed interest in things like where their food comes from, especially now we're maybe worrying about things like food shortages, depending on how long this goes on for.
Absolutely. There is there has been a greater interest in food production for quite a while, and people have been more and more concerned about how their food is produced, how it's treated, what's added to it, all aspects of that. And the fact of being connected now to the soil, literally, by growing things in your back garden, that's clearly part of what we're going to see moving forward. That said, it's also been interesting to see how people have returned to more classical foods. Even the fact of, I know that in the United States, some of these plant-based alternative meats, in particular, are really struggling to make sales. Things that are further processed, people are looking for things that they can freeze, that have long shelf lives, that they understand what the label shows. It's been just quite really, really fascinating to see how coronavirus has shifted the patterns in terms of what we want and where we get it from.
And in terms of the shift in the wider industry, Aidan, now that I suppose COVID is here and we don't know how long it's going to be here for, presumably in any business, and agriculture is no exception, adaptability is key at the moment. What kind of adaptability are you seeing, or what stories are you hearing of how people in the business have had to kind of adapt and change their model and change their thinking to stay afloat?
Yeah, I suppose the most obvious one is that farming has always been belly to belly relationships, both sales and marketing, always done face to face, people who knew people for generations. My first sales call in Ireland, we went with to see some farmers, and each meeting at that stage was taking 2 hours. And during the 2 hours, we talked about nothing about the business. We talked more about, and I came away saying, I'm going to die if I've got to do this all the time. And the salesperson from the co-op said, look, what they're doing is trying to understand you. Are you the type of person that they'd like to do business with? Are you the type of person that they trust? Now, the reality of farming, as it is with all businesses, that 2 hour period has accelerated and been reduced to a shorter and shorter period of time. And as a result, we're dealing with situations where already the farming sales, farming marketing, something they're purchasing, something they're selling, is very much being reduced to, let's call it, quite a short conversation, short relationship. I think agricultural technologies, obviously I work for a company that's using cameras to watch animals. That means that the veterinarian doesn't need to turn up all the time. That means that the nutritionist, the person making the feed formulations, doesn't need to be on the farm all the time. And even the farmer can watch his cows or other animals 24 hours a day. So that's clearly part of where we're going in terms of this type of technology. I see 3D printers. You wouldn't imagine 3D printers on a farm, but what happens when your tractor breaks down? What happens when the feeder doesn't work? What happens if, so the ability to be able to print that part in real time directly from something that you access on the internet, tremendously exciting. And even we see 3D printers allowing you to print your own pizzas and print your own cakes and print other things. So it's technologies like that I really think we've talked about for a while. There's a very precise, immediate need now being driven by coronavirus.
You did mention at the start of this conversation that farming is a very conservative industry. I'm wondering, is there a divide emerging then between maybe younger farmers or more innovative farmers, more adaptable farmers who are embracing all this new technology, and the more conservative ones who will they fall behind? Is there going to be a huge divide that emerges from all this?
That's certainly possible, and to some degree, probably was happening already. That said, my mother, when we gave her an iPad, I think it was surgically attached to her arm, because every time you ever asked her about anybody, she would immediately tell you how she had just checked them out on Google. We hear lots of people are saying they're 72-year-old, 74-year-olds who are suddenly experts in Zoom, and if not necessarily how to change the background, certainly understand that technology as well. So as needs are created, clearly that does change behavior. And I think everything is possible if you need to learn. What is very clear from my perspective is that there are a lot of positives from not the disease, but perhaps the situation. And having followed some of the previous interviews that you've done on JOE.ie, I know you have featured this quite a lot. People talking to us about how we might upskill ourselves during this period, how we might find that opportunity, that time to connect with family. And both of those, I didn't steal them from you, but nonetheless, they were in there as things that I found when I was talking to food companies, feed companies, people involved in farming and agriculture. They were talking very much about upskilling. I think this connected thing is obviously something I've mentioned already. That's absolutely critical. I think the opportunity to look at costs, sometimes there's things that you just continue doing because they're easy to do, because you want to do them, because you feel that they're well, we've done it that way always, why would we change? This is probably the opportunity to ask the question, why is your business designed the way it is? Why is your farm constructed the way it is? Why do I work with these people? Why do I not work with others? Where could cost be stripped out of the system that would have no immediate damage to my business and might actually benefit it? So it's things like that that I think this moment, I called it making lemonade out of lemons, which is obviously a famous phrase. There's another one by Warren Buffett, which is when the tide goes out, you see who's swimming naked. Since we had to have an image to go with the blog and go with the article, I felt that wasn't going to be an appropriate one.
Lemons probably work better. Yeah.
Exactly. Lemonade and lemons is probably a little bit easier for the graphic artist to work with. But it's the same idea that in some ways there's a lot of, from a business perspective, there's a lot of negatives that go. It's very hard to reimagine, to repurpose your mind. But I've seen business after business do it. I've encouraged people to, if you have customers, try to hold something that isn't just describing. I watch and listen to the news here in the morning, RT, and it's just unmitigatingly negative. And I appreciate this disease is having extraordinarily terrible impacts on so many people. And there are a lot of heroes in the front line trying to fight it. But at the same time, we also need to think about, we can't change the situation. What can we do to change the outcomes from that situation? What can we do to change our attitude to it? And I think particularly the businesses I've worked with, I've said to them, let's hold webinars, let's hold ways to reach out to customers and give them ideas of where people are doing the right things, doing new things, and use that innovation to maybe make something good out of this very bad situation.
Well, that's exactly it. I suppose we're all hoping something good will come from this. I know you mentioned before that Newton's theory of gravity was born out of a pandemic. Without asking you to predict the future across any industry, what might come out of all this that we could use to improve our situation? I guess as a society, irrespective of what industry anyone's in.
The average American is supposed to commute. The commute is something like 47, 48 minutes. And in the UK, they say as we get older, they've been doing studies with managers and finding that those in their 50s are the ones who commute the longest, well over an hour on average. That's an hour every day, obviously there and back. So that's 2 hours a day. What could we do to recapture that time? Most businesses have worked on the basis that you can't work virtually, you can't work from home. It's not possible to achieve things. And what we've learned, I think, over the last few weeks, certainly is that working from home is possible. We've also said, I don't want to be the one I mentioned 3D printers. I don't want to train my people online or using virtual reality or augmented reality. Well, guess what? We need to embrace that now. I've mentioned the cameras that we're working with in Cainthus. We're working with them at cows. There's so many different applications of that technology. We've seen it in many big brotherish bad ways, but actually there's so much positive that could be done with it. Clearly, again, all aspects of things like blockchain, we say we're going to do it. We see the advantages of it. It brings transparency. It brings trust. Yet in a situation like this, it's clear why we should have embraced it faster and why should that already be implemented. So I think that I hope that we come out of this, obviously, with an acceleration of technology. Some of the things that we're going to have to do to be resilient perhaps are going to be counter to the typical business thought processes of let's be efficient, let's be fast, let's be nimble. We're going to find ourselves being hamstrung a little bit by some of what has to happen to make sure that when the next problem arises, and I'm sure there will be more, that we're ready for them. But at the same time, their technology is clearly going to be a winner out of all of this.
And what about people, Aidan? Because any business in any industry comes down to people in terms of staff. I'm wondering how your own team are doing and what's the resilience like there?
Well, some of them are loving it. I have a team here in Dublin of 40 people. Our sales and marketing are overseas. We're actually selling primarily into California. I'm sure that for the first few weeks, most of my team thought this is fantastic. Get to stay at home. They typically are a little bit less extroverted. So that means because of your programming algorithms, engineers. Obviously, as time goes on, mental health is a real issue for everybody. So staying positive. We've done everything we can, from virtual water coolers, virtual lunches, karaoke at the weekend. We've tried as much as possible to bring on, we have a weekly meeting that's a Zoom meeting, try to bring on some guest speakers to talk about different ways in which the world will be now, will be in the future. Because even if you're very introverted, even if you don't particularly like people, it's still important to have access to, you suddenly realize the value of being in an office as well. So I think that it's a terribly challenging time for all of us. But in general, I would say that my team at least has embraced it very positively. We had 12 months where we're all working together in an office, so the relationships between all of us were good. And I think for those 40 people, working virtually has been relatively seamless compared to what I would have expected.
Okay, always good to hear. We're almost out of time, Aidan, but I wanted to leave you with, I wanted to hit you with a pretty big question before we let you go. Farming in 2050, and indeed diet in 2050. You mentioned earlier, plant-based meat alternatives, etc. On the one hand, they seem to be getting increasingly popular. But on the other hand, there's a lot of pushback against them. Are we witnessing, maybe not right this second, but over the next 30 odd years, will we witness the end of farming as we currently know it? I suppose, what will the future bring for the industry as well as for food production?
I typically get to go to a lot of conferences in a year and speak both to consumer groups and farming groups and people involved in agriculture. And whenever I'm asked the question, where are we going to be in 10 years, 15 years, I'm quite happy to answer it. When somebody like you asks me where we're going to be in 2050, I usually refuse, because there's so much going to change. If you ever read of any Yuval Noah's books on Homo sapiens, Homo Deus, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, these are things that are quite scary. That convergence of man and machine makes me wonder what exactly we're going to be feeding in 2050. Are we actually going to be human at all? So looking into the immediate future, there will be a place for plant-based proteins, of course. However, I think all of us are very concerned by the amount of additives that are going into them to produce what they produce. People talk about petri dish meats. Frankly, when I see the numbers of antibiotics being fed to them, when I see how they're being produced in these fermenters, there's nothing appealing about them at all to me. We've been very worried about climate change, particularly in Ireland, and the effect cows have had on that. It turns out that when we switch off airplanes and we switch off cars, the greenhouse gases go down, but we still have the same number of cows out there. So I think people are going to rethink some aspects of agriculture and probably going to be much more positive about the traditional agricultural ways we've done things and look to try to understand better. I think animal welfare certainly is going to be part of our future, treating our animals properly, making sure that they're happy, that they're not sick and they're not being mistreated. Those are all parts of, I think, what's quite critical. What do I think we eat? More precision nutrition. By precision nutrition, that means we understand we've got to feed our genes, we've got to feed the bacteria in our stomach. Those are equally, the microbiome is as important as what we are. And I think that's probably going to mean eating less, eating the food that we need on a particular day, and probably more also devices telling us what we should drink, or when we should eat, when we shouldn't eat, what exercise we need. But I think it's a positive future. I don't think it means by any means a reduction of the death in traditional agriculture. I think it's just going to be allied to other technologies, and those technologies will make us healthier and hopefully lead for happier lives for all of us.
And more resistant to viruses when they come along, perhaps, from a standpoint of health.
Well, definitely so, Yvonne. I know that I've looked at my diets and thought, am I eating fish for omega-3? Have I got enough selenium in my diet? Where is my vitamin D coming from? My vitamin E? What am I doing with respect to zinc? All these things are very important when it comes to resisting viruses. So yeah, nutrition is very important.
Well, I think that's a perfectly positive note to end the conversation on, Aidan. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we all got a lot out of that, and I'm sure this won't be the last we see of you. Stay safe until this all passes.
Thanks, Yvonne. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Well, that's it from us for this week. Thanks for being with us as always. And thanks to AIB for backing the show. Don't forget to hit subscribe so that you get the full show on podcast or YouTube each week and so that you never miss an episode. And we'll be here next week.